I'm Marlene Caldwell, 68 years old, retired 5 years now, after 4 decades working as an accountant. Mornings still come early. Whether I want them to or not, I'm always up by 6:30, even without the alarm. I slip out of bed, slow, careful not to pull my back again, and make my way to the kitchen for coffee. The curtains are thin, and the light from the street lamps gives the room a quiet glow. Pasadena's waking up, and so am I. But these days, I take it slower. I live alone in a small apartment now. But every wall, every piece of furniture has a memory attached to someone else. Before we get too deep into it, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. And if you've ever had to choose between your peace and your family's comfort. I'd love to know. I'm not the only one. The apartment's modest but neat. It's not the big house I shared with my husband Roger for nearly 35 years, but it's mine. Roger passed 5 years ago, one spring morning while pulling weeds in the garden. No warning, no goodbyes. The doctor called it a heart attack. I still don't like to say the word out loud after the funeral. I held on to the house for a little while, but it was too quiet, too heavy. I couldn't sleep with all that space echoing around me. I sold it. 6 months later, the kids were upset, mostly my daughter Michelle. She said I was erasing her history. She didn't see that I was just trying to keep breathing. Michelle's the oldest. She lives with her husband Troy and their 2 kids in a rental across town. It's small and noisy, and she's always talking about how they need more room. My son, Austin, he's different. He jumps apartments every few months, says he hasn't found the right energy yet. I used to worry about him now. I just let him be. I used the money from the sale to buy this apartment and put the rest toward helping Michelle and Troy. I gave them enough for a down payment on a house. It was something they couldn't do on their own, Michelle said. The market was impossible, Troy said. They just needed a leg up. I didn't think twice. I wanted them to have something stable. There was only one condition. I told them the house would stay in my name, not because I didn't trust them, but because it felt safer that way. Michelle didn't love the idea, but she didn't argue either. Austin didn't take it well. He said, "It wasn't fair that they got a house and he got nothing." I told him, we'd figure something out later, when he settled down, when he had a family of his own. He never brought it up again. Not with words, anyway, these days. Most of my mornings look the same. Michelle calls a few times a week, asking if I can pick up the kids after school. She always has a reason. A meeting runs late, Troy's on shift. Sometimes I wonder if she calls just to delegate, not to check in. I love my grandchildren, I really do. Rowan is 15, talks fast and walks faster. Lyle is 13 and always has his nose in a book. They don't ask for much, just someone to listen, someone to be there. But some days, when I'm standing outside their school, waiting when I cancel lunch with my friend Gladys again, when my plans are the first to go, I feel something stir in me. Not anger, not quite, just the faint ache of being forgotten. I ran into Mrs. Calloway last week, my neighbor. She lost her husband too, around the same time as I did, but she didn't shrink. She started ballroom dance, joined a book club, learned how to quilt. She told me I should come with her sometime, and I almost said yes. Almost instead, I said, I had to babysit again. And yesterday, Lyle let something slip over lunch. Said they were going to Hawaii next month. A real family vacation? Rowan nodded. Said she wanted to take pictures for Instagram. Lyle said, Uncle Austin was coming too. I smiled and asked, and when they were leaving 3 weeks from now, no one had said a word to me about it. Michelle never mentioned it. I was just here, making lasagna and checking math homework and getting left behind. That night, I waited until the kids were in bed, and Michelle came home, arms full of shopping bags, talking fast about deals and sales and new sandals for the beach. I asked her gently about the trip. She blinked, looked away, and said they'd meant to tell me, but there just wasn't an extra ticket, and besides, they needed someone to watch the house while they were gone. She said, it made sense, like it was natural. I nodded and said, of course I'd help. But when she went upstairs, I stayed on the couch, sat very still. The living room was full of their pictures, their laughter, their things. But not a single one of me. I sat there until the moon shifted across the window, and that's when the decision started to take shape. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I knew I couldn't keep living like I was, invisible. After the kids finished their pasta, Lyle stayed in the kitchen to show me his science project. We sat side by side at the table, flipping through the assignment instructions and planning out a simple experiment with baking soda and vinegar. He liked the messy ones. He said they were more fun. Rowan never came out of her room, not until a few minutes before Michelle walked through the front door. She was humming something as she came in, arms loaded with shopping bags. I stepped aside to let her pass, and she dropped them onto the couch with a little breathless laugh. "Mom, you would not believe the discounts I found today," she said, pulling out a pair of flip-flops. "These were half off, and look at the kids' swimsuits. Aren't they cute?" I nodded and admired what she showed me, waiting for her to finish. I could tell she was in a good mood. Her voice was light, her face bright. "Oh, also," she added, "I need to get a manicure and pedicure tomorrow before the trip." "You don't mind watching the kids again, do you?" "Of course," I said with a smile. "I'm always happy to help." She leaned in and kissed my cheek. "You're the best mom ever. I don't know what we'd do without you." She went upstairs with the bags, and the kids followed one after the other. Lyle saying something about the beach and dolphins. I stood in the quiet kitchen for a moment, the smell of tomato sauce still in the air, then gathered my purse and let myself out at home. I changed into my nightclothes, made a cup of tea, and sat by the window. My phone buzzed just after 8. It was Fern. She'd drawn up the preliminary contract. The buyer had already submitted a deposit. Everything was moving ahead quickly, I replied. Right away. Told her I'd come by her office at 9 the next morning to sign. After that, I opened my tablet and pulled up the real estate listings again. It didn't take long to find it. The little house in Sierra Madre was still available. 2 bedrooms, a tidy yard, a bright living room with tall windows, and a view of the mountains. It had an orange tree in the back and a white fence in front. I read the description twice, then wrote down the realtor's number. I'd call him tomorrow after my meeting with Fern. I stayed up late that night, looking through the photos again and again. Something about that place felt steady, like it was waiting for me. I thought back on what Michelle had said at the door, and what she hadn't said. No mention of the trip, no invitation, no you'll be missed in the morning. I took the bus downtown and met Fern at her office. The contract was ready, and so was Maxwell Thorne, a tall man in a dark gray jacket with kind eyes and a quiet voice. We reviewed the paperwork together. Fern explained the timeline. The deal would close in a week, and the family would take possession a week after that. Michelle and her family would have 2 weeks to move after the meeting. I stepped outside into the bright sun and called the realtor in Sierra Madre. The house was still available, he said, and the sellers were motivated. I asked if I could see it. That afternoon, he said, 3 o'clock would be fine. I went straight back to Michelle's house to watch the kids. Rowan was in her room again. Lyle was at the table drawing with markers. I made them lunch, grilled cheese and apple slices, then told them I'd be out for a little while. They barely looked up. The drive to Sierra Madre was quiet and quick. The town was smaller than Pasadena with shaded sidewalks and tidy houses. The kind of place where neighbors still waved from their porches. The house was even prettier in person. The orange tree in back was full of fruit, and the porch had a swing with blue cushions. The realtor Garland walked me through every room. The kitchen had new appliances. The floors had been redone. The master bedroom faced the mountains. The second bedroom could be a study or a guest room. The couple who lived here are moving to Florida. Garland explained they just finished upgrading everything before they listed it. I looked around the room one last time, then turned to him and said, "I'll take it." He looked surprised, but smiled right away. We signed the paperwork and I gave him the deposit. The rest would be finalized the same week. Michelle's house was sold when I got back to the kids. They were watching a movie. Rowan didn't look up. Lyle asked for a snack. I made popcorn and sat with them until Michelle came home. She walked through the door beaming, her hair freshly done, her nails painted pale pink. "Everything go okay?" she asked. "Just fine," I said. "They had lunch and did their reading." Lyle finished his science outline. She dropped her purse on the table. "Great. Listen, will you be able to get here early tomorrow? Troy and I want to try that new place downtown for lunch. It's hard to get reservations." "What time?" I asked. 10 if you can," she said. "It's a teacher work day, so no school. I'll be here." I told her, "You're a lifesaver." "Mom, really? I don't know what we'd do without you." I left a few minutes later, the sky turning gold on the drive home. 3 weeks went by quickly. The sale closed just as Fern had planned. The deposit was released and the final documents were signed that same afternoon. I signed the closing paperwork for the house in Sierra Madre the day after everything was official. I sat Michelle down in the living room and told her the house was sold. The reaction was immediate. Her voice cracked into a shout, her face red with disbelief. Troy sat beside her, stunned. His hands clenched together. "You sold it?" she cried. "How could you do that? We've lived here for 5 years. We're leaving for Hawaii in less than a week. You have 30 days to move." I said, "That gives you over 3 weeks after you return from your trip." "But where are we going to go?" she asked. "You know, we can't afford to stay in this neighborhood. The kids would have to change schools." "I'm sorry," I said, "but the decision has been made." Troy looked at me, then said quietly, "Where will you go?" "I bought a small house in Sierra Madre," I said. "It's modest, but it's enough for me." Michelle stared at me. "So you're throwing us out, just like that?" "After everything, I'm not throwing you out," I said. "I'm giving you time to make a plan, and I've already given so much to this family. It's time for you to stand on your own." "I'll never forgive you for this," Michelle said, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said. "But it's time." She left the room in tears. Austin showed up the next day, angry and loud, shouting about inheritance and betrayal. I reminded him. The house was always in my name, that he had no legal claim, that he'd borrowed money for years and never paid a cent back. He didn't like hearing that. "You promised it would stay in the family," he said. "I promised to help where I could," I replied. "But that help has run out." He slammed the door on his way out, and I haven't heard from him since. When I told the kids about the sale, they looked confused and hurt. Lyle asked if we were still going to make lasagna. Rowan didn't say anything. I didn't explain the reasons they wouldn't understand. Instead, I told them sometimes adults have to make hard decisions and their parents would figure it out. A few days later, I packed up my apartment and moved to Sierra Madre. The little house with the orange tree was quiet and full of light. The neighbors brought cookies and fresh-picked herbs. The woman next door invited me to bingo night every morning. I drank my coffee on the porch and watched the sun rise through the trees. I was still getting used to the stillness, but for the first time in years, the stillness belonged to me. It took a few days for the noise to settle. Michelle stopped calling. Austin didn't reach out again. I spent those mornings in my new kitchen, learning the rhythm of the house. Sunlight came through the front windows. Around 8, stayed on the dining table until noon. The neighbor's dog barked twice a day, once when the mail truck came, and again when the kids across the street rode their bikes past the hedges. I unpacked a little at a time. The plates went into the cupboard above the sink, linens in the hall closet. Spices lined up neatly by the stove. Every drawer I opened felt like a small reminder. This space was mine. One morning, I found the old photo albums while sorting a box of blankets. I sat on the living room floor, flipping through the pages. Baby pictures, birthdays, school plays, Michelle in her high school cap and gown, Austin holding a fishing pole in the driveway of our old house. Roger's hand resting on my shoulder in nearly every photo. I left the album open on the table and made tea. The house was quiet except for the birds outside. Sometimes, the quiet filled me up. Other times, it pressed in like something waiting to be let out 2 days. Later, Fern called, just to check in. She wanted to be sure I was settling in. "All right, everything's moving quickly," she said. "Maxwell's family is eager to get in. They've already enrolled their kids in school." I thanked her. Told her the move had gone fine. We said we'd have lunch soon. Maybe meet at that little place near the park where we used to go. Before she changed careers after I hung up, I stood at the window for a while, watching the breeze move through the orange tree in the backyard. A few fruits had fallen onto the grass below. I made a note to collect them later. Maybe slice a few for the neighbor across the street. He'd waved yesterday when I brought in the trash bins. That evening, I went through the rest of the moving boxes and stacked the empty ones in the garage. The house smelled faintly of cardboard and lavender dryer sheets. My old blanket from the bedroom still held the scent from the apartment's laundry room. The next morning, around 9, I walked to the small market near the library, picked up eggs, a loaf of bread, some yogurt, and a single chocolate bar for no reason in particular. I stopped to talk to a woman arranging a basket of lemons outside her shop. She said she liked my sandals, asked if I lived nearby. We talked for 5 minutes, then went our separate ways. The days began to take shape, gentle and unhurried. By the end of the week, I had a loose schedule in place. Mondays were for groceries. Tuesdays, I might visit the library. Thursdays, I watered the garden and swept the walkway. Edwin and Dorothy from across the street invited me over one evening for tea. Dorothy made shortbread from scratch. We played a round of cards and sat on their porch until the streetlights flickered on. I didn't mention the kids or the house. Not yet. Sunday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. Marcia was standing on the porch, her arms folded across her chest, sunglasses perched in her hair. She didn't ask to come in. She just looked at me. "We got back this morning. She said there was a letter taped to the door from the new owners." I nodded. "I left it the day before you returned. 30 days as agreed." "I didn't think you'd go through with it," she said. "I thought it was just a scare tactic." "No," I said, "the sale is final." She stepped inside without asking. I moved aside and let her pass. "The kids are confused," she said. Rowan asked, "why Grandma doesn't want to be part of the family anymore." I didn't answer right away. Troy's trying to stay calm. She continued, "But we can't find anything in our budget that's close to the school. We're out of options." I motioned to the kitchen table. "You can sit if you want." She sat slowly, looked around the room. "This is where you live now?" "Yes," I said. "It suits me. It's small," she said. "I don't need much." She was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward. "What are we supposed to do? Find a place to live?" I said. "You really won't help us?" "I've helped for years," I said. "I'm not giving more money. You and Troy have jobs." "You'll figure it out." Her voice tightened. "But the kids, they'll be fine," I said. "They'll adjust. You're being cold." I looked at her evenly. I stopped bending. "That's different." She stood suddenly and walked to the door. "We'll figure something out without you." I nodded. "And when you're all alone, don't call us," she added. She left before I could say anything else. I sat in the armchair and folded the dish towel in my hands. That night, I went to bed early. Rain tapped softly on the windows. The orange tree swayed in the wind. The next few days were quiet. No calls, no texts. I stayed busy, planted a row of lavender along the back fence, started a small list of books to borrow from the library Thursday afternoon. The phone rang. Austin's name lit up the screen. "I picked up Mom," he said. "Michelle's in a bad place." I waited. "She's been crying," he said. "Says she can't sleep. Says the kids don't want to move schools. She asked me to call you. Maybe you'd reconsider?" "No," I said. "You could at least help with the deposit?" he said. "She's your daughter. You owe me thousands, I said. If you pay that back, maybe I'll consider helping. He was silent. You know what he said. After a moment, Michelle was right. You are selfish. We put up with your quirks for years. Now when we need you, you shut the door. You didn't put up with anything, I said. You called for help. And I came. Every time it was just a vacation, he said, you're making it into something huge. It wasn't about the trip, I said. It was about finally seeing the truth. Well, you don't exist to us anymore, he snapped. So don't expect calls. He hung up. I turned the phone face down on the counter. Outside, the sky was pale and streaked with cloud. I opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The air smelled like wet soil. The orange tree was quiet again. I stood there a while, then went back inside and made a cup of tea. The next morning, I swept the porch and watered the lavender. The soil was dry and crumbly, and the sun hadn't fully come up over the ridge. The breeze was soft, and the air smelled like oranges. I watched a hummingbird hover near the feeder. I'd hung the week before, wings moving so fast they blurred against the light. I made oatmeal and ate it at the small kitchen table. A little after 10, the doorbell rang again. I looked through the peephole and saw Michelle standing there. Her arms were wrapped around her chest, her hair pulled back into a quick knot. No makeup, no shopping bags. I opened the door and stepped aside. She didn't say anything as she came in, just walked to the chair in the corner and sat down. Her face looked tired. We can't find anything, she said after a long silence. Everything we look at is either too expensive or too far from the kids' school. I sat across from her and waited. The only place we could afford is in a neighborhood where I don't even want to park after dark, she said. The apartment's small, the school's underfunded, and Troy's worried the kids'll fall behind. I didn't interrupt. She rubbed her hands together, then looked up at me. Please help us. The kids didn't do anything wrong. They don't deserve this. I nodded slowly. You're right. They didn't. She leaned forward. So, can you help with a deposit? Maybe co-sign a loan? No, I said gently. I've done enough. She pulled back like she hadn't expected to hear it again. You're really not going to help us, she said. You're really just going to let this happen. I told you when we spoke before the sale. I'm not changing the terms. How can you be so cold? I'm not cold, I said. I'm just done being taken for granted. She stood up. This is about the vacation, isn't it? Because we didn't invite you, no, I said. That was the moment I realized how things really were. Not the reason she didn't answer right away. She looked around the room again, slowly taking in the couch, the pictures on the shelves, the vase of fresh flowers by the sink. We begged you, she said. You still said no. You've begged before. Every time there's something you want. And when you get it, you go right back to how things were. Her voice dropped. So that's it. You're done being a mother. I'm done being a backup plan. I said. She didn't say anything else. Just turned toward the door and left. I stayed at the table for a while after she was gone. The sun had shifted, and light now covered the far wall. I listened to the refrigerator hum and the clock tick above the stove. That afternoon, I walked to the post office and mailed 2 change of address cards to distant cousins I hadn't heard from in years. I picked up a quart of milk and a small bouquet of flowers from the market on the corner. The woman behind the counter asked if I had company coming. I said no. In the days that followed, I filled out paperwork, updated my driver's license, and sorted through the last box in the garage. I met Imogen next door, who brought over a jar of homemade strawberry jam. She invited me to a community breakfast at the senior center on Saturday, said it was casual, and they served fresh pancakes on Friday. I went to the library, checked out a novel and a gardening magazine. I sat outside on the bench under the shade of a sycamore and read 2 chapters before heading home. Saturday morning came with soft gray skies. I watered the plants and wiped down the counters. I saw Edwin from across the street carrying a folding chair and waved. He waved back. Just after 11, my phone buzzed. I picked it up and saw Austin's name again. I let it ring twice, then answered. "She's still not sleeping," he said. "Rowan doesn't want to change schools. Lyle won't talk to anyone. Michelle says they'll be scarred forever because of this." I waited. "You have the money," he said. "You're in a new place. You could still help them. You know what I've given?" I said. "You also know how many times you've borrowed and never paid back." He didn't argue. "So that's it?" he asked. "You're just going to sit in your little house and forget us?" "I remember," I said. "I remember every birthday, every late-night phone call, every babysitting shift, every loan, every ride to practice, every grocery run, every missed lunch with friends. Every time I said yes." He was quiet. "I don't want to talk anymore," he said. "We don't need you." He hung up. I sat on the porch for a while after that, watched two squirrels chase each other across the fence line. The sun broke through the clouds and lit the edge of the porch swing. The air smelled like rosemary from the neighbor's garden. The next day, I vacuumed the living room and rearranged the small bookshelf by the window. I added a few photos from the old albums, one of Roger and I on our anniversary. One of the kids at the zoo when they were little. I made soup and froze half of it for later on Tuesday. I met Imogen at the community center. We sat with Dorothy and two other women from the neighborhood. The pancakes were soft and served with butter in little glass ramekins. Afterward, I walked home past the library and the coffee shop and stopped to admire a row of daffodils growing along the sidewalk. It wasn't loud or exciting or busy, but it was mine. A few days after the community breakfast, I was out in the garden clipping the dead heads off the rose bushes when I saw Michelle's car pull up along the curb. She sat there a while, engine running. Windows closed, then turned it off and stepped out. She didn't have her usual confidence, no sunglasses, no phone in her hand, just a worn jacket over a t-shirt and jeans. She walked up the path and stood by the gate. I didn't move right away, just brushed the last few petals into a small pile, then wiped my hands on my jeans and turned to her. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. I nodded and pushed the gate open. She followed me onto the porch and we sat across from each other on the swing for a while. She didn't say anything, just looked out toward the neighbor's yard. "We've been to 12 showings," she finally said. 2 of them already had 5 applications in before we got there. Another one smelled like mold. "The only place even close to what we need is 300 more a month than we can afford." I nodded once but didn't speak. "The kids don't understand," she said. "They keep asking why we have to leave. Rowan keeps saying it's not fair." Lyle just shuts down. "He didn't even eat dinner last night." She paused, looked at me carefully, then said, "We can't do this on our own. We're trying, but we can't." I waited. "I know what I said last time." She went on. "I was angry. And I know this whole thing has been hard for you too. But Mom, please, we need your help. Just enough to get us into a place that won't make the kids scared to sleep at night." I looked at her and asked one question. "If I help you now, what happens after?" She blinked. "What do you mean? Do things go back to how they were?" I said, "You calling last minute. Me canceling plans. Sitting in a house while you're out. Watching the kids while you forget to check in." She opened her mouth, then closed it. "I'm not giving you money," I said calmly. "And I'm not offering more time. You have 2 weeks left in that house. That's already more than required. It's up to you and Troy to figure out what comes next." She sat back slowly, hands in her lap. "You said you'd always be there for us," she said quietly. "I was," I answered. "I was there every time you asked." She stood up. "I guess we're done then," she said. She walked back to the car without another word. I stayed on the swing as her taillights faded from view, then went back inside and made a pot of coffee. Later that afternoon, I opened a tin of cookies Dorothy had dropped off 2 days earlier. Pecan sandies shaped like little half moons. I had one with my coffee, then called Edwin to ask if the offer for canasta night was still open. He said, "Of course." I brought iced tea and joined them after dinner. The four of us sat on their porch with citronella candles and quiet laughter, the sky turning a deep lavender above the trees. The next morning, I checked the mailbox and saw a letter from the city about a senior utility rebate program I hadn't known existed. I filled out the application and walked it over to the drop box downtown on the way back. I stopped in at the local florist to ask about seedlings. The woman behind the counter told me they'd have lavender and sage starters next week. I asked her to set 2 aside. By Friday, I had cleaned out the second bedroom and started measuring for curtains. The walls were still bare. I wasn't in a rush to fill them early. Saturday afternoon, I sat down to read when the phone rang. The screen showed Austin. I stared at it for a moment before answering. "She's a mess," he said, without a greeting. "She's not eating. She's crying half the day." Troy's furious. "The kids won't stop asking questions. You've ruined everything." I stayed quiet. "You could fix this," he said. "You could still give them money. Give them more time." "Something. You called me a selfish old woman," I said, "and told me I didn't exist to you anymore." "I was angry," he said. "You still haven't paid me back a cent," I said. "But you're asking for more." "It's not for me," he snapped. "It's for your daughter and your grandkids." "It's still no," I said. He went silent. "You've changed," he said. "Eventually, no." I said I finally stopped saying yes. He hung up. I put the phone down and sat back in the chair. The house was quiet and warm. The light from the kitchen window was soft against the floor. On Monday, I stopped by the community center to pick up a flyer for a watercolor class Imogen had mentioned. She said the instructor was patient and the group small. I wrote down the day and time and said I'd come next week. I dropped off a bag of oranges at Dorothy's door and waved to Edwin, who was trimming the hedges. Tuesday morning, I swept the porch and rearranged the potted plants by the steps. The lavender starters arrived Wednesday, just like the florist had promised, and I planted them beneath the kitchen window before the sun got too hot. Each day moved slowly but fully. On Thursday evening, I had just finished a load of laundry when the doorbell rang again. I opened it and saw Michelle on the step. She didn't look angry this time, just tired. Her shoulders drawn and eyes red like she hadn't slept. She came inside without waiting and sat down in the same chair as before. "We found a place," she said. 2-bedroom. Smaller than we hoped. Farther than we wanted. But it's safe. And the school's adequate. I nodded. "The lease starts in 10 days. We'll move the day after we get back from Hawaii." I didn't say anything. "I know you don't want to hear it," she said, "but I still don't understand how you could do this." "We begged. We cried, and you didn't flinch." "You've cried before." I said it never changed what happened afterward. "We're your family," she said. "I gave everything I could," I replied more than most. "And when you planned a vacation, you didn't even think to ask if I wanted to come. You needed someone to watch the house." She didn't answer. "You didn't forget to tell me?" I said. "You didn't consider me part of it." She looked down at her hands. Rowan said, "She doesn't want to see you again," she said. "Lyle said he misses the lasagna but doesn't understand why you're being mean." "I'm not being mean," I said. "I'm finally choosing myself." She stood again. "We'll be out of the house in time," she said. She walked to the door, paused for a second, then left without turning back. I stood in the entryway for a moment, then walked to the kitchen window. The new lavender looked strong, rooted the night before their flight. The neighborhood was quiet. The streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and the air smelled faintly of cut grass and jasmine. I stood by the kitchen window, watching the porch light flicker on the rental house across the street. had been empty for months, but someone had left a pair of folding chairs near the mailbox. I went to bed early that night, left the window cracked just enough to let the breeze in. The lavender under the sill had started to bloom, and the scent was soft and familiar. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, made a cup of tea, and stood in the doorway with my robe wrapped tight. It was Saturday, their travel day around 7:15. A black SUV rolled up to Michelle and Troy's driveway. Trunks popped open, bags lifted. Rowan stepped out first. Dragging a pink suitcase, Lyle followed, wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat. Too big for his head, Michelle barked orders. Troy loaded the bags, then slammed the trunk shut hard enough to rattle the taillights. None of them looked across the street. Not once by 8, they were gone. I stayed inside. Most of that day, I put on music while I dusted the bookshelves, then took out the lemon balm from the kitchen pot. It hadn't taken root as well as I'd hoped. Late that afternoon, I walked over to the other house with a notepad in hand. I checked the locks, turned off the porch light, drew the living room curtains, and made sure the side gate was latched tight. I didn't linger. The house was stripped down clean, but hollow, a few dishes left behind in the sink. A basket of unopened mail on the counter. I left a note by the stove, reminding them the thermostat was set to 72. Back at my apartment, I finished a crossword and reheated leftovers around 9:30. My phone buzzed. Austin. I let it ring twice before answering. "You win," he said, without preamble. I sat down on the edge of the bed. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means you got what you wanted," he said. "They're out. They're angry. And the rest of the family? Well, you don't exist to us anymore." He waited. I didn't respond. "They said they're cutting you out for good," he added. "No more holidays, no visits, no calls. You made yourself clear, and so have they." He hung up. I sat there for a long time afterward. The room felt very still. The next morning, I walked 2 blocks to the Sunday market and bought a bundle of snapdragons and some early peaches. The flower vendor complimented my earrings, said she hadn't seen me in a while. I smiled and told her I was coming back to life when I got home. I cleaned the counters and watered the window plants. The week went by without a sound. From any of them, the house stayed quiet. No mail, no messages, no surprises. Then on Wednesday, Dorothy stopped by with a bag of lemons from her tree. She said she was making a double batch of marmalade and asked if I had any spare jars. I brought her 3 and we sat in the sunroom sipping tea while she told me about her granddaughter's recital. When she left, I noticed an envelope on the doormat. No name on the front, just tucked under the edge of the mat. I opened it. Inside was a photo me standing by the gate in my robe taken from the street. No note. No handwriting. Just the photo. I stared at it for a long moment, then turned it over, blank. I folded it back into the envelope and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. Friday evening. The lockbox company arrived right on time. 2 men with careful hands and quiet voices. They brought new keys, reset the codes, and handed me the remote. Everything's set. One of them said, "You're the only one with access now." I thanked them and locked the door behind them. Saturday afternoon, I walked to the post office and forwarded all mail for the rental house to Troy's workplace. I wrote the card out, slowly signed it with my full name, and asked the clerk to confirm the change. She gave me a small nod and handed me the receipt. I tucked it into my wallet and went next door to the diner for a slice of lemon pie by Sunday afternoon. The apartment felt lighter. I opened the windows wide and let the breeze move through. Monday morning. A knock came just after 8. I opened the door, and there she was. Rowan, arms crossed, backpack slung over one shoulder. "I forgot my charger," she said flatly. "Michelle said it might be here." I stepped aside and let her pass. She went straight to the back room, looked around, and found it under the desk as she walked out. She paused by the doorway. "Are you mad at us?" she asked. I shook my head. "Then, why are you doing this?" I looked at her. Sometimes people get so used to taking that they forget someone is giving. I said. She didn't reply, just nodded once and left. Later that day, I sat down and opened the notebook where I kept old recipes. I'd written notes next to some of them, tweaks over the years, little tricks for moisture or crust, or how to make something stretch an extra meal. I flipped through until I found the lasagna recipe and copied it onto a new index card. I wrote for Lyle at the top, folded it, and sealed it in an envelope. That evening, I walked over to Dorothy's and asked if she'd mind passing it along through her church's youth group. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't ask questions, just said she'd see what she could do. Tuesday afternoon, I brought the old sewing box down from the hall closet. I hadn't touched it in years. The thread spools were dusty and the needles had gone a bit dull, but the fabric was still there. I started patching together strips from the old quilt Roger's mother had made for us decades ago. It had torn badly a few winters back, and I never found the energy to fix it. But now I had the time and the quiet stayed. The sun was still low when I stepped out that morning, cool air brushing against my arms as I crossed the walkway to the front gate. The azaleas were beginning to open, white blooms against the green. It was quiet except for a delivery truck backing out from the next block. I stopped by the mailbox, pulled out a thin stack of circulars, and one padded envelope inside was a new checkbook. The cover had my name printed in the corner, in clean silver lettering. I took it inside, laid it on the counter, and made tea around mid-morning. Dorothy called to say she was heading to her daughter's for the weekend. She asked if I'd keep an eye on her porch. I told her of course, and reminded her to bring a jacket. The weather was shifting after lunch. I walked down to the bank with my folder tucked under my arm. It had taken me 2 weeks to sort everything, the accounts, the statements. The power of attorney, revocation forms the notary had. Double-checked everything. The manager's assistant led me to a private room where I handed over the last of the paperwork. By the time I stepped back out onto the sidewalk, I felt something in my shoulders loosen. No more automatic transfers. No more co-signed debt. No more shared liability. I bought a newspaper from the corner rack and tucked it under my arm. Back home, I folded laundry and started a pot of soup. The kind with barley and root vegetables. The apartment smelled warm by the time the sun began to dip just before dusk. I went to check on Dorothy's porch, watered her window ferns, then came back and settled in for the night. The next day was quiet until around 3 o'clock when I heard the knock. Not the front door, the back gate. I stayed still a moment, then went to the kitchen window and looked out. It was Michelle standing just outside the fence, her sunglasses perched on her head, arms crossed. Phone in one hand, I didn't move to open the gate. She called out, "I know you're home." I stepped onto the porch and stayed behind the screen. "You changed the locks," she said flatly. I nodded. "You gave us no warning," I didn't answer. "We were supposed to pick up the patio set today," she went on. "You said we could store it here while we were gone." I glanced toward the yard. The patio set hadn't been touched in months. "Plans change," I said. She stared at me, Austin said. "You've been talking to banks?" she said. I waited. "Are you planning to sell?" "That's my business," I replied. Her jaw tightened. She looked past me into the house, then took a step closer. "Rowan cried all night when she found out. She said she thinks you don't love her anymore." I opened the door and stepped out onto the top step. "I do love her," I said. "I always have." "Then, why are you doing this?" "Because I spent 20 years giving everything, and now I need something left for myself." She didn't respond, just turned and walked away down the alley without saying goodbye. I went back inside and locked the door. 2 days later, a letter arrived. It was from Austin Short typed on crisp paper. It said, They would be returning in a few weeks to collect the rest of their things and that they expected access to the property. I placed it in the drawer with the photo. Friday morning. Dorothy called from out of town. Said she'd heard through her sister that Troy had been making noise about hiring a lawyer. I thanked her for the heads up and told her not to worry by Saturday. I had prepared a full file for the property management group that now handled the legal side. A local woman named Ruth with a practical voice and a firm handshake. She'd been referred through the bank. We sat at my dining table that afternoon, and she walked me through the options. They have no legal stake, she said. You're on every deed and title alone. I signed what she needed and handed her the folder when she left. I felt the stillness settle again. Later that evening, I sat on the couch with a small notebook opened to a blank page. I wrote out the names of the recipes Rowan used to ask for when she was little, then copied 2 of them on cards and placed them in an envelope. I mailed them the next morning with no return address. The following week, I received a certified letter from Troy's office. It included a list of items they claimed belonged to them. A bookshelf, a box of tools, the patio set again. I scanned the list and noticed half of it had been broken or abandoned years ago. I replied through Ruth and included photographs of the remaining pieces. None of it was in usable condition on Wednesday. Someone rang the bell at 6 a.m. I checked the peephole. It was Lyle standing alone in his jacket, hair still messy from sleep. I opened the door and he looked up at me wide-eyed. They forgot my science binder, he said. I need it for the trip. I nodded and let him in. He went straight to the study and dug through the cabinet until he found it, as he turned to leave. He paused by the door. Grandma, he said, do you still like pickles? I smiled. Always, I said. He pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small jar, the kind from the corner store I picked these out. He said, they're the kind you like. I took the jar and held it for a moment, then leaned down and kissed the top of his head after he left. I sat at the kitchen table with the jar unopened in front of me. The light outside was changing. The next evening, a car pulled into the alley behind the house and stayed there for a while, engine idling. I stayed by the back window but didn't go out. Eventually, it pulled away. Sunday evening, Dorothy returned with a jar of apple butter from her daughter's pantry and a story about an antique store they'd passed on the way home. We sat on her porch while the light faded, and she told me about a rocking chair with hand-carved armrests. Monday morning, I opened my email to find a message from Ruth. She said the patio set had been picked up from the curb without incident and that no further contact would be necessary unless they tried to push back again. I closed the laptop and stood by the window. The yard looked empty but clean. I turned and picked up the quilt. I'd been mending the last corner, was ready to be sewn down. I finished the last stitch just after sunrise. The quilt was folded neatly across my lap, and the living room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen outside the windows. The morning light stretched across the lawn, pale gold and still. I took a deep breath and let it fill my chest. Not hurried, not heavy, just still for the first time in years. There was no knocking, no crying, no chaos, no inbox full of requests or calls laced with guilt. Just a calendar with open days and a fridge stocked with what I liked. I went for a walk, that morning, past the corner where the boys used to set up lemonade stands in the summer, past the fence I'd painted with Lyle one year, when he was little, past the bush where Michelle once hid during hide-and-seek. Laughing so hard, she gave herself away. I stopped by Dorothy's to return a book, and she handed me a lemon bar wrapped in wax paper, said she'd made extras and thought I might like one. I thanked her and tucked it into my coat pocket. The rest of the week moved slow in the best way. Grocery trips without rushing afternoons with my sewing needle evenings with the radio on and a cup of chamomile by the window. One day, I walked past a community bulletin board outside the rec center and saw a flyer asking for volunteers for an after-school program. They needed help with snacks and reading circles. I took a photo of it and thought, maybe I'd show up next week. The phone stayed mostly quiet. A few check-ins from neighbors, a message from Ruth confirming everything was filed and done. Nothing from Michelle or Troy. No new letters from Austin. No more attempts. Just silence. I kept the photo in the drawer. The one of me in the robe by the gate. I didn't throw it away. Not out of fear. Just memory. A reminder of a version of myself who said nothing for far too long. Now the doors were locked. Not against the world, but for peace. One afternoon, I made that lasagna recipe. Again the one Rowan liked. I portioned out a slice and wrapped it with care. Walked it to Dorothy's so she could give it to the youth coordinator. No note, no explanation, just the food itself. On Sunday, the doorbell rang. It was Lyle again. No backpack this time, just a smile and a drawing he'd made at camp. It was of a garden full of sunflowers. One of them had a little rocking chair drawn underneath it, and a stick figure with glasses. "It's you," he said, in the happy garden. I thanked him and hugged him close, told him to keep growing kind and steady, just like that. And when he left, I put the drawing on the fridge with a magnet that said, "Hope." I don't expect everything to heal. I don't expect them to come back with apologies or changed hearts. But I also don't need that anymore. Sometimes, justice looks like a courtroom. Sometimes, it looks like a locked door and a quiet house with your name on the deed. And sometimes, it just looks like waking up to peace instead of panic. If you've ever felt invisible or drained, or used up to the last drop, please know it's never too late to reclaim the quiet, to draw a line and say, "Not anymore. You matter. Your rest matters. Your joy matters." Thank you for listening. If this story spoke to you, I hope you'll pass it along or take a moment to breathe deep and remember you're not alone. We all deserve peace at the end of the day.